What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Hoops Post Up, and this time we have a very special edition of the Hoops Post Up. Of course, Spurs centered, but this time Tim Duncan. It's going to be all about the big fundamental. So there's not a lot of NBA action going on unless you're into really old school footage of playoff games from like the 90s and
Hardcore classics.
that's right, hardcore classics. Very good. And so yeah, I mean we love reflecting, of course. That's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about a guy who is in the news because the one thing that is going on is the Hall of Fame induction, of course, not going to stop. And Tim Duncan, finally, his turn to enter the Hall. A little bittersweet, I guess, because I know you wanted him to play until he was like 50 years old, right?
I was happy he's back on the bench. Let's just say that.
Yes, he's still in full effect there on the bench with the Spurs as a coach. Nobody thought that would happen, but he's there. He's still working out, practicing with the guys. But we're going to look back at his playing career and talk about what made him so special, our favorite memories, and just how it changed the whole trajectory of the Spurs franchise. So this is the Tim Duncan Hall of Fame special.
And the best power forward to ever play the game.
I don't think that's a dispute, right? All right. You can have your Barclays, your Malones, whatever, and it's not even just about the rings. But I mean, yeah, I think there's probably not much dispute, right? It's got to be Tim Duncan.
I think it's Tim Duncan.
Okay. The question we're going to ask a little later is he the best Spurs player ever? And you might be surprised with some of the results we come up with, but let's save that for the end. Let's start by talking about what Tim meant to the Spurs as a franchise, because it's easy to say, well, they drafted him, they won championships. But let's look back, somebody who is a lifelong, hardcore Spurs fan. So, as somebody who's born and raised in San Antonio and watching the Johnny Moores and the Artis Gilmores and, of course, the Iceman, what did it mean to you to see Tim Duncan become a Spur, and just that transition from seeing, what they were always a good, sometimes occasionally great record-wise team, but never a team that was, considered a serious championship contender, to all of a sudden becoming the biggest dynasty the NBA has seen in how long?
All right. So when I'm looking back at the couple of years prior to Timmy coming to our team, we're talking David Robinson, right? The Admiral, the ultimate player, superstar, right? And as a fan, and I know when we were watching in the Dome, like, we didn't give David enough credit. Bless his heart. Like, we were always ripping him, talking about how, he needed to be more aggressive, et cetera, et cetera. Now looking back, wow, I need to shut up back then, because
Old you didn't appreciate what the Admiral just
I was young and naive.
This is young before me, not me, right? I always appreciate that, but this was before me.
Anyway, so the year prior to that, I think it was 95, right? We had a pretty good season. I think we had 59 wins and we were doing well. And then 1996 came, right? And we were horrible. Like, Bob Hill was our coach. He got fired midway through the season. I think we finished 20 and
62, I think.
Something like that. 20 and
wins.
62. We only had 20 wins that season, okay? And yeah, I'm feeling that this year. Like,
Oh, they weren't that bad this year, but anyways. They should have been. They should
Pretty
have tanked.
close.
They should have tanked it like they did last time. But anyway.
pretty close. Anyway, so here comes the lottery pick, and we are all watching, right? And we get the number one pick, and we're screaming. I'm like out of control, jumping up and down, yelling from, whatever. And we got Tim Duncan, right? Number one pick. And that changed. Like, without him, I don't know if our franchise would still exist.
Well, I mean, they would exist, but would they be what they are now? Of course not.
I don't know. I think they would have moved. I think they would have sold, and I think they would have moved, and I think we would have lost our team.
You think the fan base would have?
I think we would have lost our team.
Wow. Okay. So I didn't see that coming. I mean, obviously the championships, you can argue, and think about it now. It was pretty much consensus, right? Everybody. Tim Duncan was the number one pick. Everyone knew he was going to be, and he had to be the number one pick. But really, because back then it was the big man. It was all about the big man still, right? For those who are millennial or younger, if you don't know what basketball used to be like, the 3-point shot was just kind of like a small part of the game, and it was
Very
all
small
about having the
part.
center and the big man. There's a reason that Michael Jordan wasn't the number one overall draft pick, right? Why did they take Sam Bowie? Because you had to have that center, that big guy. So, but Tim Duncan, it wasn't a sure thing. I want to say a slam dunk that he would be the number one pick, that he would dominate right away, because when you got a guy like Shaq come out, like, and he was dominant because you couldn't physically stop him, right? He was so big and so powerful, and he was breaking backboards. I mean, there was no question he was going to be a dominant force, and he was. With Tim, though, remember, he started late, right?
Right. They asked him about this to reflect back on his career and would he have done anything different. Well, he started late. He didn't start playing until he was 18 years old.
He was a swimmer.
Yes, he was.
In the
And
Virgin
he was
Islands.
actually a very good swimmer.
Yeah.
And so they asked him about that. And being 4 years at Wake Forest under Dave Odom, his coach, he said he needed that coaching. He needed that time for development because he hadn't played for so long. And he actually talked about how much his game had improved. And it was the right decision for him to stay there for 4 years. Now, 1997, he was actually the basketball players' all-time player of the year in college. So he was our number one pick, right? Everybody knew he was going to be Tim Duncan.
And then
number
stepped
one.
in and was rookie of the year in the NBA, which again, I mean, you think, okay, he was number one pick, but go look back the past few years, how many number one picks never even panned out, much less rookie of the year. All right. So it's not an automatic. You still have to adjust. You still have to learn. You still have to have all the right parts in place. And I know that was very important that he had said, because if he had gone to another team, what if it wasn't the Spurs who got that ping pong ball, right? What if it was another team? If Tim Duncan had landed on, let's say, the New Jersey Nets, who incidentally at number 2 took Keith Van Horn, let's just imagine there was switch there. What if the Spurs had said, oh, we need a guy, Van Horn, he's our guy? Well, do you think the Spurs would have any rings?
No.
No, nothing against Van Horn. He was a solid player for a few
Solid
years.
player, but the only reason why we had all of those, Tim Duncan was the reason.
Was the reason. And, there's some good players, even some that came out with rings. I think number 3 was Chauncey Billups that year. He won some championships. He was a really good player.
We were battling with Detroit. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I mean, head to head, Billups almost took one against the Spurs.
Yes,
They had
he
one
did.
against the Lakers instead. But anyways, would it have the same impact?
No.
No, a point guard versus a center and a power forward. But so if, let's say, Tim Duncan had gone to New Jersey or some other team, do you think he would have changed the face of that franchise, or is it the fact that he was uniquely positioned in San Antonio with Coach Pop, with David Robinson, with that structure?
From what he has said, I think it was just a gift, right? He was blessed coming into this position, being the right fit, the right player with the right organization. I think it all was just meant to be.
Right place, right time.
Yes.
So he talked about how having those supports in place, having a guy like
Vinny Del Negro to learn from.
Vinny Del Negro, of course.
Sean Elliott.
Taught him everything he knows. Sean Elliott, but of course the Admiral.
Put your foot on the line for a 3-point.
Yeah, exactly. The David Robinson factor can't be overlooked. You're talking about original Dream Team member, of course, a Hall of Famer, top 50 overall player ever. Having that mentor, and the thing is, we talk about
such a outstanding human being.
Exactly, and that's the thing. Not just such a great basketball player, but what better mentor on and off the court? I mean, so selfless. So I think that can't be overlooked. You have to, and Tim, of course, himself has always given David a ton of credit, right?
Yes, yeah. So, just we're talking about our favorite memories. We're talking about what we remember back on his career. So it was interesting to watch him develop early on. It was interesting to watch my team change, from being this pretty good team, right? But to being dominant as the years continued with
And they were good. Don't forget, like you said, right before that season where everything changed, 59 wins, and then of course, David
David
gets
Robinson
hurt.
had an injury. It ended that
Sean Elliott
season. Sean only played half the season that year.
Right. Coach gets fired. Pop comes in. He's a first-time head coach. And then the next year they're back up and they win 60 games. But it's not just about winning games, right? Because I think at that time Spurs fans were tired of just winning and being in the playoffs, and then all of a sudden it was the next level. So we're not giving all the credit 100% just to Tim. It's the
Well,
big
I don't know.
three. I mean, he is a major factor, but Dave Robinson for bringing him in, Pop, of course, the system he put in. I mean, everything had to kind of fall into place, right? But Tim was the major factor.
Yes, they don't call him the big fundamental for nothing.
And that's the style of play that, the beautiful game that they created, basically. It no longer exists.
Okay, so talk to us about how, you transitioned from your time in Miami, because that's where you were born and raised. Talk to us about when you came to San Antonio and how you became a Spurs fan and what your first memories were.
Well, yeah, for me, the thing is, I mean, there's so many. Was it 19 seasons of Tim Duncan? There's so many memories. I mean, there's too many to name.
Well, you were here for all of them.
And I've been here. So, but for me, I mean, it was from the beginning because you do almost like take for granted how dominant and how great they are.
I
But
love watching footage
yeah.
from those years.
And break out the DVDs because there's no live basketball on anymore. There's no playoffs, so we're gonna be watching our Spurs greatest stuff. But for me, I'll always remember the very beginning, and not just talking about his first season, but that first finals, because we knew the Spurs. Okay, well they're good again, right? You can win 60 games, but so what, right? There's a lot of other teams that can be in the playoffs, make the conference, finals.
So
But
when they were in the series with the Knicks,
yes.
where were you watching those last few games?
Okay, so I had just come to San Antonio. It was 1994 where I came, and this was to go to college. So I was not a resident, not a full-time resident, right? But I was spending most of my time here. And then in 1999, that's when I officially lived here, right, in San Antonio. And I remember just watching with friends at that time, and everyone else was, of course, hardcore Spurs fan. And for me, it was just as much rooting for the Spurs because, now this is one of my teams. I mean, I say that because I'm grown and, raised in Miami, and I'm a Heat fan. I'll always be a Heat fan for life. But then the Spurs, now that's my of new hometown team. But I was just as much being a rabid Heat fan. I was just as much rooting against the Knicks because, of course, the Knicks and the Heat at that time were bitter rivals. If you don't know, again, younger generation, Google Jeff Van Gundy hanging on Alonzo Mourning's leg. I was like, great.
Remember
Those
that
are some battles.
happening. Oh my god,
those are some battles. The Heat and the Knicks. Yeah. But anyways, I was hated the Knicks, hated them, and of course I really wanted the Spurs. And nobody thought, the Spurs are going to win a championship, right? They weren't the favorite because they had never done it before. And so I just remembered everyone going crazy because this was the first time. And Tim Duncan had just come into the league and, just kind of taking it by storm. That didn't happen back then, right? It wasn't as easy. You had guys who would come out. That was still a time when guys were coming out of high school, right? That was before the rule changed. And you have rookies coming in. They weren't expected to be dominant, right? Sometimes they have to sit 1-2 years and learn.
And Tim talked about that. He wasn't having to be the go-to person. He wasn't having to be the number one on the team. And he was learning and developing from
the expectations weren't the same. He didn't have to come in and dominate. And he wasn't on a team that was because usually you're the number one pick. It's because you're on a really bad team, right? You're on the worst team. Well, the Spurs had the worst record, but they were one of the best teams, right? They had Robinson and Elliott. So he didn't have that weight on his shoulders, right? He didn't have to carry a team. But he did anyways. So to me, I'll always remember that just first impression of him just dominating from the beginning.
Right.
Now you have a lot more memories.
No. But I was thinking of that 1999 when we're in the finals, and it's the game that we won the championship, right? Mm-hmm. You were watching it, and the biggest Spurs fan, I like to call myself, was actually at a wedding. I was at a wedding. I didn't even get to see the game. Nobody had the TV on going. It wasn't like you could head out to
Who are these people?
the bar or whatever. Anyway, so I made my date at the time. We went to the car and listened to it on radio, WOAI radio. I made him listen to the game on radio, and I got to hear it happen. Now, oh my gosh, was that awful for me not to be able to see my team?
What people are these that they're from San Antonio? They weren't watching.
Well, they weren't from San Antonio. This wedding was in South Texas in the Valley.
Okay,
so
well, that explained it,
we
but
were
still.
we were in Brownsville.
Wow. But to me at that point, lucky for me, see if I was your date at that time, which I wasn't, to see your dedication, you saying, screw the wedding, I got to go listen to the Spurs game. See, that would have done it for me. I would have just proposed on site at that time. But lucky for me, he didn't. So
That's
an
right.
error in my favor.
That's right. So anyway, so after that happened, ran back, watched all the highlights and everything. For those of you who don't know us very well, 2005 happens, right? And we're in the championship and Tim is dominating again. And I am watching the playoff, the ending of the season, like all of this stuff. So pregnant. I'm like 8 months pregnant. Then we're in the finals, and that week we had our first baby, and I am screaming pregnant, like to hear, and I am
Really,
like, I
really pregnant.
thought-
You couldn't
I
tell that she
thought-
managed somehow to gain 50 plus pounds, which is like doubling your size, basically.
So anyway, so I am actually in the hospital screaming like crazy, and here we have a newborn, and she's
Not from
probably
labor pains, but yeah, from the Spurs. And sadly, she's not. I mean, she's a Spurs fan, but she doesn't really.
Oh,
keep up
both
with
of our
it.
baby
I don't know
girls
why.
don't watch basketball. How crazy is that?
So
They
we
probably
gotta
got
change
tired
that.
of me screaming the whole time.
I think that's what it is.
So,
It's like a rebellion.
2005, we had our first child. 2007, we had our second child. So
That's right.
those were good years. I'm
Championship
never going to
years.
forget those championship years. So going back to Timmy. Okay, so yeah, I mean, 19 seasons, 5-time NBA championship winner, 3-time MVP finals,
That's right.
right?
It's
The list goes on. His
there's
accolades go
so
on.
many accolades, and it's just so many things to remember. It's mind-boggling to think that one person could accomplish so many things in one career, and yet he did.
All right. So something funny when I'm reflecting back and I'm thinking about Timmy and his game, some of the best memories, right? Obviously watching him in the finals, obviously, experiencing that 2005, 2007 with my family and our, having going through this as new parents and stuff. But do you remember that time when Joey Crawford gave Timmy... Like, Timmy got ejected for laughing on the bench, right? Seriously.
He wasn't even on the court, right?
He wasn't even on the court. He was laughing on the sidelines, and Joey Crawford gives him his second technical, and that was it. There was this...
Of all the people, who,
Right. It wasn't,
it wasn't Rasheed Wallace.
Rashid, that's
No.
what I think. I think
No.
Rashid getting the technicals.
Or not
Timmy
Ron Artest.
never seriously. It was so I remember that, right?
That's funny.
And so I thought this was hilarious. David Stern, may he rest in peace, actually told Joey Crawford after that game he needed to go get some anger management therapy.
Yeah, he needed it a long time before then, but that kind of cemented it. Like, okay, look, dude.
And Joey Crawford ended up making it right. Later on, he apologized to Tim, and it was what it was. But I remember watching that, and I was like, "Are you kidding me? He just got ejected for laughing."
Well, the best part of that, the memory, is the look on Tim's face. Like, he couldn't even speak after that. He's like,
Are you talking to me?
and he has that face with the big eye. He's like,
Yeah.
that was classic.
The best memories: his spin and fake shot, bank, of course.
Bank's always open for Timmy.
Being that leader, and I always loved how he would rub Manu's head, and it's a joke, like he started Manu's baldness.
You're rubbing it so
Always
much.
rubs it.
That's funny. All right, now let's move on to talk about the legacy. We already know his legacy is cemented both in NBA and in Spurs lore, but here's the question. Is he, without a doubt, and I'm asking you as lifelong
this
Spurs
one's
fan,
too
have
hard.
seen this in person, is he the best Spur ever? Because think about the competition here. You have David Robinson, who I already mentioned, you should know, is a top 50 all-time player, maybe underappreciated just because he didn't get that ring until Tim came along. And then also there's a guy named the Iceman, who, again, this was a different era, but if you look at his numbers, he was a perennial all-star, right, on a team that didn't quite have as much surrounding talent. And he's
Anderson.
loved just as much here, maybe more in San Antonio, just because of the personality, right? Tim, not known for his flashy personality, but the Iceman is always around. He's still around.
Yeah.
So let's dig into some of the numbers first. How about that? Because we're trying to be objective here. All right, so talking about the big three, not the big three that you know it, but the big three all time in Spurs history. That's Tim Duncan, David Robinson, George Gervin. So these numbers are a little closer than we might have expected, aren't they?
Yes, yeah. I was actually surprised to see the numbers compared with Timmy and David. David's numbers were actually better.
A little bit better. Now, of course, different categories, but
Different categories, and David was the main player on the team. Timmy had to share his time, his minutes, his points with
good.
Manu
Yeah,
and Tony.
that's a good point, and we'll get to the advanced stats in a second. But let's just start with the basics. All right. So points per game. This is for a career, right? Just all around. So for the career, and then Tim Duncan did play the most games. He played 1389. I'm sorry, he started 1389. He actually didn't start 3 times, which is shocking. 1392. George Gervin played 1060. David just under 1,000, 987
Yeah,
games.
very nice.
But these are averages. So per game, Tim Duncan 19 points per game. I'm kind of surprised he didn't even hit 20. I thought that would be higher.
Yeah.
David with 21.1 points per game. The Iceman 25.1.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big gap there. 6 points per game more than Duncan. Does that surprise you?
It does surprise me, actually. But, I mean, ice was ice.
Iceman, I mean, that finger roll, you can't stop the finger roll. That's one thing he knew how to do. All right, but that's points. He was a scorer, so let's talk about rebounds, right? Total rebounds per game. The Iceman at 5.3. Of course, he wasn't a big man. Timmy at 10.8 and David at 10.6. That actually surprised me a little, too. I would expect David to be on top, right? I would think that he, I mean, he had so many monster rebound games. Assists, they're all kind of the same. Of course, that's not a big factor there. Steals, too. Blocks, this is where David has the edge. 3 blocks per game,
Yeah.
which is pretty damn impressive. Timmy with 2.2 and George Gervin 1 block per game.
Yeah.
So far, how do you feel is rounding up?
It's still leaning towards David as having the better impact
Pretty
on the
close.
game.
More points. The rebounds, again, basically the same. More blocks. The better defensive player. We'll get to that in a second. What about field goal percentage? So we talk about the actual field goal percentage. Tim is 50.6% shooter. Gervin, 50.4. David, 51.8. But the effective field goal percentage, and look at that, Timmy and the Ice are tied with 50.7. David on top again, 51.9%.
I know. I'm telling you. I need to go back and watch David's games again.
Maybe. All right, now let's talk a little bit about some more advanced stats here. So, talking about the surrounding cast, right? So, it is true that David did pile up some big games because he was kind of all they got, right? They had a couple shooters around him, but it wasn't Tony and
like-
Manu and all
exactly.
these other players, especially in the older days, right? The later days, you got like guys like Kawhi Leonard, and other free agents that would come over. Okay, so usage rate. What was their usage rate like? What would you guess without looking? Who do you think got the most usage in their career? Was it Ice, Timmy, or Admiral? Who do you think?
I would say ice.
Okay, makes sense. That would be a good guess. I might actually have guessed David Robinson. Well, we're both wrong. No, I'm just kidding. You're right. So
Really?
you're right. David Robinson, the lowest, 26.2% usage. Timmy at 27 and Ice 29.6.
Yeah.
Because his surrounding cast was obviously lesser.
Yeah.
So Gervin, that was a pretty good usage rate. At that point, Tim and David are kind of almost tied.
It's pretty much the same.
All right, and then let's talk about defense here. How do you measure defense statistically?
I would say David had the best defense by far.
Usually the shot blocker is the one who gets the edge, and of course we were thinking Ice would be last, and yes, that is correct. Defensive box plus minus for their careers. George Gervin actually negative 0.8, a little bit of liability, right? But he was a scorer. That was his
That's right.
job.
That was his job.
He was
He
not
did
there
what he was
to
supposed to
defend. Timmy at 2.3. I'm kind of surprised and higher, and then David at 3.1. So David was the better defender.
Yeah.
Playoff totals. The last thing I'll talk about is playoffs per game because this should count. So
Oh, it's got to be Timmy by far.
you would think it's not.
What? What?
David Robinson 18.1 points per game in the playoffs for his career. Timmy 20.6. Gervin 26.5 in the playoffs. But
Smaller.
much smaller sample size.
Sample.
It doesn't have a ring for each finger.
Yeah, no.
So And then again, he played so much later into his career, right?
Yeah.
Tim Duncan played 19 seasons, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And those last few years, they were in the playoffs, but, they
Yeah.
weren't quite that caliber.
No.
And he was deferring to guys like Kawhi, right? He was
right.
taking a step back.
Yeah.
So you have to factor that in. So all told, now that we've looked at all of that, what's the verdict? Who is the best Spurs player? Is it Tim Duncan, or is it the Iceman, or is it the Admiral?
It's a 3-way tie.
No, it can't be a tie. That's
Three-way
just
tie.
not possible. She's not going to say. She's a Spurs fan. She's not going to go against. Honestly, I think it's got to be Tim, because even though David has a little bit better numbers in certain categories, you can't. And I'm not the one. I will not just count rings and say, oh, you have more championships, you're a better player, because it's all about coaching, surrounding cast, right? He wasn't the only player. It's not a one-man sport, right?
Yeah.
Just like everybody, loves to say for football, a quarterback is going to be defined on whether he wins a championship. Quarterback doesn't play the game by himself, right? He's got 11 guys on each side.
Right.
But
on his receiver.
Basketball is the one sport, I think, of the team sports, it's one player can make such an impact. And I don't think you can discount the fact that Tim's personality, right, his leadership, right, all those things you can't quantify.
So that. Yeah.
There's no coincidence that they started winning championships when he came in. Nothing against David. David's a great all-time player, maybe underappreciated, but I think it's got to be Tim based on all the factors we've talked about. Mm-hmm. And you're going to stay neutral like Switzerland?
I love them all. I love those guys.
Okay. So to wrap up, Tim Duncan always will be loved in San Antonio. I think
what do you think? Like after this
but...
Hall of Famer, he's in the Hall of Fame. This is like the icing on the cake for his career. Mm-hmm. But now he's a coach. What do you think is going to happen? I say he's coming back. What do you think he's going to do?
Coming back to play?
No.
It's like, what do you mean he's coming back? I think it's a little late for that. No.
Coming back to coach.
Is he going to be a coach? All right, so that's the question, because he's obviously on the sideline now. I know he was kind of asked because they're scrambling for some assistants at the last minute. Guys
our guys left.
Hey, guys, good jobs.
Come on,
things happen.
Ime.
Okay, but yeah, so there's a question. Does he come back for another year coaching? Is he going to ultimately become a head coach? Honestly, I think he comes back. I think he loves the game so much. He's not doing it as a favor. Exactly. He's not just doing that as a favor. He's not just doing this temporarily. He wants to coach. He doesn't want the spotlight necessarily, but I think ultimately, he will be a head coach.
I told you this is my bold prediction, and we can roll the tape back later. But it's going to be Tim, it's going to be Manu, and it's going to be Tony on that coaching sideline.
So next year, and then we agreed on this.
Yes.
Next year, Manu's
going to be
he had
added.
retired first.
Yes.
So he's going to join the staff.
Yes.
And then the year after,
Tony.
It's going to be Tony. Yeah. Right, he's spending time with his kids, but he's going to get the fever too.
Tony's totally involved on the business side. He has his team in France, and he's...
and that's the thing. Tony's got so much other stuff going on. That's why I can see him maybe not doing the coaching. I can see Manu doing it after he's had his time off, but I wouldn't be surprised. So the big three. Yes. All right, We'll see. So Tim Duncan, Hall of Fame coach.
Oh, I love it.
When it's all said and done, would he be a Hall of Fame coach? Is he going to be an excellent head coach?
Yes.
I mean, the big fundamental, how can you not be a good coach?
Exactly. Still grinding it out with his young players.
That's right. All right, well, this has been our retrospective on Tim Duncan becoming a Hall of Fame member in 2020. Look forward to that and many years ahead of him coaching the Spurs.
All right, so we do want to congratulate the others in this Hall of Fame class of 2020.
That's right. Tim Duncan, of course, one of the headliners, the big headliner. Of course, we've already talked about Kobe Bryant, rest in peace. And we did pay tribute to him just a few weeks ago, if you haven't caught that episode. But Kobe, Tim, Kevin Garnett, not to be forgotten.
Praying Mantis, I used to call him.
That's right. WNBA, let's not overlook them too. Tamika Catchings, Coach Kim Mulkey, and also Rudy Tomjanovich.
Oh, Alf.
Some great hair. Great coach there for the Rockets. And NCAA Coach of the Year, Eddie Sutton, also, and Barbara Stevens. So congratulations to everybody who's joining the NBA Hall of Fame. And, look forward to more Spurs talk from us in this channel. And get in the conversation. Do you think that Tim Duncan is the greatest Spur of all time? What about David? And look for our next episode. We're going to talk about who's going to be the next great Spurs legend of all time.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Of course, go Spurs go, and peace and love.